Did you know that your hormone production actually starts up here in the brain? Welcome to the Hormones 101. I'm going to explain how your estrogens and progesterones are produced in the body. Hi, my name is Dr. Carrie Jones. I am a women's health and hormone expert who has a lot of years in the field around hormones, laboratory and hormones, addressing hormones, treating hormones, researching hormones. So buckle up, because when it came to how things work in the body, I actually didn't learn myself for a very long time. In fact, my intro class to all things health happened probably in middle school, and it happened by our football coach. Do you have a similar story? I know. So imagine having to learn about how our cycle works from the football coach. Now, the thing about your menstrual cycle is that it is a fifth vital sign. It's really important. It gives you feedback about your body. Now, you may be listening to this thinking, I don't have a menstrual cycle anymore. Well, keep listening, because I still need you to know how estrogen and progesterone are produced. Let's start at the beginning. Your menstrual cycle is like a roller coaster. It's very controlled. You get on and you follow a specific path around, up, down, loop-de-loop, and back to the beginning again. Your menstrual cycle is the same way. You can't skip the loop-de-loop. You can't get on at a different point. You can't stop prematurely. You get on, you go around, and you come back to the same point again. That's how your menstrual cycle should actually be, a controlled roller coaster. So when we are making estrogens and progesterone, we start our roller coaster in the brain. So we have a part of our brain that feeds into the hypothalamus. I'm gonna use some big words, hypothalamus, that takes in all the integration of everything that's happening inside your body and outside of your body. It then goes down to a different section of your brain called the pituitary, and like Morse code or specific text messages, it goes down to the ovaries and tells it what to do. So, at the start of your roller coaster, the brain goes, all right, she's not pregnant, let's get her period going. So the period starts, and in that time frame, you're recruiting up, it's like a slow roll of the roller coaster before you get to the big hill. So what's happening is your ovaries are surrounded by a whole bunch of these cells called follicles, and inside each follicle is an egg, and that's the egg that gets released every month at ovulation, if you ovulate. So as you are getting the communication from the brain down to the follicle, the first communication is to the outside of the follicle, and that's where you make your androgen hormones. That's where you make some of your testosterone, some of your DHEA, and some of another hormone called androstenedione. Those float inwards to another layer of cell called the granulosa cells, and that's where you make estrogen, estrone, which is E1, and estradiol. So this is the sequence of events. Brain tells the outside cells make androgens, they float inside, they make estrogens. Believe it or not, yes, your testosterone makes estrogen. That's how it works. Then the estrogen builds and builds and builds, just like you're climbing up a roller coaster. And when it gets to a certain peak, it tells the brain we're ready to ovulate. And so what happens is estrogen will drop. Another hormone will come out called luteinizing hormone, LH. Those of you who maybe did LH strips or ovulation predictor kits to become pregnant at some point, or just to find out if you ovulate, that's the signal we're looking for. LH goes up, LH comes down, and then ovulation occurs. Once you ovulate, estrogens drop down. So now you're coming down the roller coaster, very controlled. You're down the roller coaster, the egg is released, and all those cells magically, like an irreversible Cinderella, turn into a structure called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum pumps out major doses of progesterone and minor doses of estrogen, estrone, and estradiol. So now we're in the second half of our cycle. So we've done the loop-de-loop, we've gone up the hill, down the hill, done the loop-de-loop of ovulation, and we're gonna keep going. So now we're going up another hill because you're making milligrams worth of progesterone. The body is preparing just in case you choose to become pregnant. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. And then if you're not, you come down the other side of the roller coaster hill, you get your period, and we start over again. Now, this is really helpful to know, because let's pretend you are perimenopausal, but you're in the early stages of perimenopause, or even like early to mid stages. So you still get your period, but you're wondering what's going on with these hormones. So now that you understand the roller coaster ride of what can happen, when we become perimenopausal, our roller coaster shifts. Our roller coaster completely shifts. So we lose out on ovulation. Or maybe we ovulate, but we don't produce progesterone as much. So this is where you might think, oh, okay, maybe I'm having heavier periods. Maybe I'm having worse PMS. Maybe I'm not sleeping as well. Maybe I'm having more anxiety, because progesterone helps all of those things. And if you don't have it, because the body has decided to restructure the roller coaster at this point, make it less or take it out completely, so now you don't ovulate, you don't make progesterone, then you're going to potentially experience those symptoms. Now, what about estrogen? Well, again, the roller coaster gets remodeled in perimenopause. I am not saying it's fair or fun, but it is what happens. So the brain is trying to communicate through pulses, Morse code, text messages, down to the ovaries. But as we get into perimenopause, the pulses aren't getting received. Those cells, the outside cells, the inside cells, they're not getting the message like they used to. Or sometimes they just get it and respond too quickly. So now you suddenly are on a roller coaster that will swing wildly. Maybe you thought you were on a roller coaster that was the roller coaster of your 20s and 30s, but yet you hit your 40s, mid 40s to late 40s, and all of a sudden your estrogens are really high one day and then they drop down the next day, or they're high for a couple days and they drop down, or maybe they're down a lot. Maybe you've gotten on the roller coaster and it's more like the kiddie roller coaster and the estrogens are quite low, and then you switch tracks and now you're back on a bigger roller coaster and you have more hormones again. And this is how women feel. They start to feel as they move through perimenopause, they're getting jerked around on the roller coaster. First, they lose the loop-de-loop. They lose the ability to make progesterone like they used to. So they're not as calm, not as relaxed, not sleeping as well. Periods are maybe heavier, longer. And then they're switching tracks again and estrogen goes all over the place. Now, eventually, when she goes about 12 months, we call that menopause. On the 13th month, you're postmenopausal. So eventually your roller coaster will flatten completely out and you will become postmenopausal. You won't get that wild swing. Now you might be thinking, okay, but once I'm postmenopausal, now where do I make hormones? Like, now where does it come from? Well, your ovaries still do produce some of those androgens, some of that testosterone, even as you become menopausal and postmenopausal. And then what happens is that those androgens float out in your system and they aromatize or convert into estrogen. So we can make estrogen in our ovaries. That's the predominant way, like the huge way. And we make a little bit out in the system. When we're in menopause, all our estrogen comes out in the system. So testosterone comes out floating around, converts into estrogen. Obviously, it's in much tinier doses. It's still a much smaller amount. Nothing like the follicles in the ovary, but we still make estrogens. Progesterone drops down from huge, like 30, 40 milligrams to less than one milligram. And the majority of that progesterone is produced out of your adrenal glands, your glands of stress. Because when you are making hormones down in these glands, progesterone can be a precursor for making cortisol. Now, unfortunately, giving progesterone does not automatically increase cortisol. It's a very tightly controlled system how that works. Progesterone does not insert itself into the cell from outside the cell, inside the cell, and suddenly give you all this cortisol. That's not how it works. But inside the cell, in a very controlled, tight loop, progesterone can be on the track to help you make cortisol. Some of that progesterone, less than a milligram, will leak out and go into circulation. So this is why when women go into menopause, if they test their progesterone levels at that time, they will see that it's usually very, very low, very, very low, because hardly any is getting leaked out or eked out. So now you have a better understanding that starts in the brain. The brain takes all this information in and puts you on the very controlled roller coaster until you hit perimenopause. Then you seem to jump tracks depending if you're early in perimenopause, middle perimenopause, or late perimenopause. Now, there's no true definition of are you early, middle, or late perimenopause. Early, generally though, we accept that you're still having symptoms, you're still having cycles, but you haven't skipped anything yet. Once we get into the mid-perimenopause, we're starting to think like, oh, you've been at it for a while. Maybe you started noticing, let's say you started noticing your first symptoms around 43, 42, 44. By about 47, you may notice like your cycles are getting shorter, your cycles are getting longer, and the symptoms maybe are happening more often or growing in list. Then late perimenopause is when you start skipping cycles. Maybe you've gone 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months with no cycle. That's late perimenopause. Maybe that you are in the menopausal transition, because remember I said you go 12 months with no period before you, on the 13th month, you're considered fully menopausal or postmenopausal. So that's kind of how we judge like where you are. If you're just like new to this, just starting to get symptoms, you're early. But if you've been at it a while, probably mid. And if you haven't had your period in a while, probably late. Now, if you have had a hysterectomy, if you don't have a uterus anymore, but you still have your ovaries are still doing the same thing with the roller coaster. We just don't use your period as a marker of how we determine what's going on, where are you, and if you're menopausal. So hopefully that helps you understand that it is this really neat, cool system, but by understanding how hormones are made, we can support your health even more. If you are early perimenopause, even mid perimenopause, by understanding like from the brain all the way down the cell, that means brain health is really important. That means cellular health is really important. This means things like, have you had any kind of head trauma, traumatic brain injury? Do you get good sleep? Do you have sleep apnea? Do you mouth breathe? Do you have good blood flow? Do your shoulders right up at your ears all the time? You've got sort of like your neck anatomy is not that great. You feel tight muscles all the time, so it's affecting blood flow up and down. Think about that with the brain. Think even about environmental toxicants. Think about medications. Think about alcohol. Think about drugs. All of this goes up and can affect the brain in the way that it functions. Even oxygenation. Are you breathing? Are you a shallow breather? Do you get enough oxygen up there? And then we go all the way down to the cells. So how are the health of your cells? Are you eating good fat? Remember, all of your cells are surrounded by what's called a lipid bilayer. So we want to make sure that our cells are super healthy. So are we getting enough good fats? Are you getting, a nutrient-dense meals? Are you avoiding the chemical toxicants? Are you, evaluating your alcohol intake? Is that affecting you? Are you having symptoms because of it? Medications, drugs, etc. These all play a role in how you do or don't make a hormone. Because if the body gets the feedback, if the brain says, oh, now is not a good time to make this hormone, then it is going to potentially be lower than you might want it. So this is why you hear all the time in the foundational work, like we're going to talk about your sleep and your GI tract and your nutrition and your exercise and your stress and your community and the supplements or medications that you take and the things that you use. You probably see this on social media. You probably have heard it if you've seen an integrative or functional practitioner at all, because they're really trying to evaluate what's coming into your body and affecting the brain all the way down to the follicles and the ovaries, and how can we improve upon that. So now that you understand the roller coaster analogy and how this goes up and down, it just helps us understand you better, so that if you are at a stage that we can maybe optimize that and continue to keep you cycling for a little bit longer, or producing hormones at a healthy rate for a little bit longer, then let's do that. But if you're more like, oh no, I've been jumping tracks, I have been skipping cycles, I feel all over the board, now you at least understand where the hormones came from and what the body is doing now that your hormones have dropped down. So you want to make sure that you hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to continue to explain the Hormone 101. I'm going to go into a lot more detail in other videos on estrogen detoxification, which is known as estrogen metabolism, on progesterone itself, because I think it's really important that you understand these hormones that are in your body, how we make them, like today, how they work, how the body gets rid of them appropriately, why we use hormone therapy if you need it, as you move through this menopause transition, because ultimately I'm here to educate so that you can absolutely thrive. So again, hit that subscribe button. Don't miss a video. I want you as educated as possible, because you have the right to understand what's going on in your body. And we don't get taught this at any age, quite honestly. Not a young age, not a middle age, not any age. So consider this your menopause school 101.